Why did the soldiers want to kill all the prisoners on the ship in Acts 27? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Acts on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Acts chapter 27, verses 39 to 44. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Acts 27, verse 39. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Acts chapter 27, beginning at verse 39. When it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with a beach on which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea, meanwhile loosing the rudder ropes. And they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. But striking a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow struck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land. Paul had been on a rather harrowing trip from Palestine to Rome. He was going to Rome in order to appeal to Caesar his unlawful imprisonment. It was now fall, and sailing on the Mediterranean Sea in the fall and winter is rather dangerous due to the storms that can crop up on it. And during this trip, the ship that Paul was on ran into a major storm. Paul advised the captain to remain at Fair Havens on Crete, but due to a more suitable port at Phoenix on Crete, the captain chanced going out a short ways further, despite the weather they had been facing up to that point. That was a big mistake, as for 2 weeks the ship was tossed to and fro in losing its cargo and much of the furniture on the ship along the way. If it were not for God protecting Paul and the crew, they would have certainly been dead. Finally, after 2 weeks, they were closing in on the shore. They hadn't seen the land yet, for it was night, but from the soundings that the crew had taken up, they knew that the water was getting shallower quickly, meaning land was nearby. The sailors tried to sneakily take the skiff, the small vessel that could be used to save someone from shipwreck, to make it to shore. But Paul got the centurion to get the soldiers to cut the skiff loose. We noted in the last lesson that even though God was protecting Paul, he was doing so through human hands, showing us that providence isn't always accomplished through some supernatural means. We must do what we can, and God will ensure that our efforts will succeed if it is his will. The crew was going to be saved, but they needed all hands on deck, as it were. The day had finally come, and they could see land, but they didn't know what land it was. These sailors, I'm sure, had traveled the Mediterranean many times, but that doesn't mean they've been everywhere. And since they were disoriented due to their 2 weeks at sea, not knowing where they were going, it's understandable that they didn't recognize the land. They could have been anywhere on the northern coast of Africa. They could have been carried out closer to Spain. They could be between Greece and Asia, what we call Turkey. There are so many islands there. I would have been surprised had they known what land they were looking at. What they did observe, though, was a bay with a beach where they believed they could safely steer the ship towards the shore. They hoisted the mainsail in order to steer the ship that way, but because they didn't know the island, they also didn't know the terrain under the water. And so it was when they came to a place where two seas met, likely meaning a sandbank submerged in the water that they didn't see, the ship ran aground. Now, I'm not a sailor, but I do know that running a ship into the coast is not a good idea and will heavily damage a ship. But this wasn't a ship made of steel. It was a ship made of wood, meaning that it even had less tolerance to hitting land. The stern of the ship was broken, meaning that the ship was no longer seaworthy and was going to sink quickly. Let's remember, though, that even though this was a merchant ship, it also was carrying prisoners, and so despite the shipwreck, the prisoners still couldn't be allowed to escape. lest the soldiers in charge be killed by the Roman authorities. That is why the soldiers wanted to kill all of the prisoners, but the centurion, Julius, for Paul's sake, told them not to do so. Paul had gotten them this far, said that all of them would be saved by God, and so the centurion trusted that not only would all of his prisoners make it to shore, but they wouldn't escape either. And that's what wound up happening. Those that could swim jumped overboard and got to land first, while the rest used some of the boards of the ship to float their way to shore. Without God's protection, all of them would have died. With God's protection, all were saved, showing us that the weather, no matter how harrowing, is not powerful enough to stop God from accomplishing his purpose. But where were they? We'll find that out, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Acts chapter 28, verses 1 to 10, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.